I've been documenting human behavioral patterns for 3 years now. Filed 17,000 incident reports. Cataloged every measurable response to crisis, joy, loss, and discovery. But nothing in my data prepared me for the sound Sarah Martinez made when she realized her daughter's name was on the memorial wall. It wasn't crying. Wasn't screaming. It was the sound of every joke dying mid-sentence. Every laugh cut in half. Every moment of lightness collapsing into the gravity of what cannot be undone. The joke had lasted 10 seconds. The silence after her name lasted longer than some wars. And, in that silence, I learned the one thing my reports never capture: how humans survive the exact moment their world ends. How they breathe when breathing feels like betrayal. How they stand when standing means accepting what they refuse to accept. This is that moment. This is how it happened. This is how Sarah Martinez taught me that documentation means nothing when you're watching someone's soul reorganize itself around an absence. The thing about observing humans is they never warn you when they're about to shatter. I was supposed to be documenting the memorial dedication ceremony. Standard behavioral analysis. Crowd dynamics. Grief patterns. The usual clinical distance that keeps my reports readable and my sanity intact. Sarah Martinez stood 3 people to my left, laughing at something her friend Janet was whispering. The laugh was the kind that makes other people smile reflexively, full-throated, unguarded, the sound of someone who'd forgotten, for just a moment, why they were here. She wore a yellow sundress. Bright as a warning sign. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. I'd been tracking this woman for months, not in any official capacity, just the way you start noticing a recurring face in a crowd. She showed up to every commemoration event. Every dedication. Every anniversary. Always brought flowers. Always stayed until the very end. Always wore yellow. My preliminary notes labeled her frequent attendee. Pattern suggests personal connection to memorial subject matter. Exhibits consistent post-grief behavioral markers. Clinical. Detached. Utterly useless. Janet was telling her about some disaster at the grocery store, something involving a shopping cart and an automatic door that wouldn't stay automatic. Sarah's shoulders shook with suppressed giggles. She covered her mouth with her hand, nervous habit I'd cataloged 3 times before, but the laughter leaked through her fingers anyway. And then, Janet was saying, the manager comes over all serious-like, and he's got this clipboard. Oh no, Sarah interrupted, eyes bright. Not the clipboard. The clipboard. And he starts asking me about my cart management technique like I'm some kind of shopping cart terrorist. The joke lasted 10 seconds. Sarah threw her head back. Full laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and honest. For 10 seconds, she was just a woman in a yellow dress listening to her friend tell a ridiculous story about grocery store bureaucracy. Then, the microphone squeaked. The laughter died mid-note. Mayor Richardson stepped to the podium, cleared his throat in that particular way politicians do when they're about to say something important. The crowd settled. Sarah straightened, smoothed her dress, composed herself into the appropriate expression of solemn attention. But I caught something. A flicker. The way her hand moved to her collar, fingers working against invisible wrinkles that weren't there. Displacement behavior. Anxiety redirected into meaningless tasks. She knew something was coming. We gather today, Richardson began, to honor those we've lost. To ensure their names and their sacrifice remain forever in our hearts and minds. Standard opening. I'd heard variations of this speech at 17 similar events. Sarah had heard it too. I could see the recognition in her face, the way she settled into the familiar rhythm of ceremonial grief. What I couldn't see was the way her breathing had changed. Shallow. Measured. The breathing of someone preparing for impact. Janet reached over and squeezed her hand. Brief. Supportive. The gesture you make when you know your friend is about to be hit by something inevitable. My pen hovered over my notepad. Subject appears composed, exhibiting normal memorial behavior patterns. But my hand wouldn't write it. Something felt wrong. Like watching a car approach an intersection where you can see the other car running the red light, but you can't warn anyone because you're just an observer, documenting the collision for your reports. Today we dedicate this memorial wall, Richardson continued, engraved with the names of the 14 souls we lost in the Harbor District fire. Their names will stand as testament to their courage, their sacrifice, and their commitment to their community. The wall stood behind him, covered with a blue tarp. 14 names. I'd seen the list in advance. My documentation required knowing what we were commemorating. But seeing a list and seeing the names carved in stone are different things entirely. Humans know this instinctively. I was still learning it. Sarah's grip on Janet's hand tightened. White knuckles. Her other hand moved to her throat, fingertips pressing against the hollow where her pulse would be visible if I were close enough to see it. She was counting heartbeats. The realization hit me with uncomfortable clarity. She was counting heartbeats the way someone counts down to an explosion they can't prevent but can't bear to face unprepared. Before we unveil this memorial, Richardson said, I'd like to invite Captain Lewis to say a few words about the brave first responders who gave everything to save others. Captain Lewis stepped forward. Tall man, gray at the temples, hands that moved like he was used to giving orders that mattered. But, when he spoke, his voice carried something softer than authority. The people we honor today, he began, didn't set out to be heroes. They set out to do a job. To help their neighbors. To serve their community. They were teachers, firefighters, EMTs, volunteers. They were parents, children, friends. Sarah's breathing stopped. Completely stopped. I watched her chest go still, watched her face freeze in that particular expression humans get when they're listening for something specific, something that will either save them or destroy them. They were people who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away, Lewis continued. People who believed that helping others was worth the risk. People who, the microphone squeaked again. Lewis adjusted it, cleared his throat, looked down at his notes. In that pause, Sarah took one sharp breath. Like surfacing from deep water. Then, Lewis looked up and said the words that would split her world in half. Among those we honor today is Maria Elena Martinez, age 29, a volunteer EMT who died attempting to evacuate residents from the Harbor District apartments. The name hit the air like a physical thing. Maria Elena Martinez. I felt it more than heard it. The way the crowd shifted, the way several people turned to look in our direction, the way Janet's grip on Sarah's hand went from supportive to desperate. But Sarah herself went completely still. Not the stillness of shock. The stillness of someone whose soul has just left their body and is hovering somewhere above, trying to decide whether to come back. Maria Elena Martinez. Daughter. The yellow dress made perfect sense now. Maria's favorite color. The flowers at every memorial, not random compassion, but systematic grief, the way a mother keeps tending a grave that hasn't been dug yet because the body was never recovered, never found, never brought home for proper goodbye. I should have been writing. Should have been documenting this moment for my behavioral analysis files. Instead, I was frozen, watching a woman receive the worst confirmation of her life in front of 200 strangers and one nosy observer with a clipboard. The silence stretched. Lewis continued reading names. 13 more people who had died trying to save others. 13 more families somewhere in the crowd, receiving their own confirmation, their own formal acknowledgement of loss. But I couldn't stop watching Sarah. She hadn't moved. Hadn't made a sound. Her face held the exact same expression she'd worn while listening to Janet's grocery store story. Polite attention. Pleasant interest. As if her mind hadn't registered the connection between Maria Elena Martinez and the daughter who had been missing for 8 months, presumed dead, but never confirmed until this moment. Janet was crying. Quiet tears, the kind that start before you realize they've started. Her free hand covered her mouth, muffling the small sounds of someone who had been hoping against hope and just heard that hope die in public. But Sarah remained perfectly still. Lewis finished reading the names. The crowd applauded. Respectful. Solemn. The kind of applause you give when clapping feels wrong but silence feels worse. Sarah clapped 2. 3 times. Measured. Appropriate. Then, she stopped. Her hands fell to her sides. The polite expression slipped from her face like a mask that had finally gotten too heavy to hold. What replaced it wasn't grief. Wasn't shock. Wasn't any of the emotions I'd cataloged in my previous observations of family members receiving difficult news. What replaced it was something I'd never seen before. Recognition. The recognition of someone who had spent 8 months preparing for this exact moment and had discovered that no amount of preparation actually prepares you for anything. Mayor Richardson stepped back to the microphone. And, now, let us unveil this memorial together, so that these names and these lives will be honored forever. For city workers moved to the corners of the blue tarp. Sarah watched them. Janet sobbed beside her, still clutching her hand, but Sarah's attention had narrowed to the 4 sets of hands preparing to reveal her daughter's name carved in stone. The tarp came away in one smooth motion. 14 names. Elegant script. Black granite that reflected the afternoon sky like dark water. There, third from the bottom, Maria Elena Martinez. The carved letters caught the light differently than the others. Newer. Fresher. Like the stone itself was still adjusting to holding the weight of that particular name. And Sarah Martinez, who had worn yellow to every memorial service for 8 months, who had brought flowers to honor strangers while waiting to honor her daughter, who had laughed at grocery store stories 3 minutes ago, made a sound. It wasn't a word. Wasn't crying. Wasn't anything I could categorize in my behavioral analysis framework. It was the sound of every joke dying mid-sentence. The sound of recognition finally, fully arriving. The sound of a mother seeing her child's name written in stone and understanding that this was real, this was permanent, this was the end of waiting for a different answer. The silence that followed lasted longer than the joke. Lasted longer than the ceremony. Lasted longer than anything I thought silence could last. And, in that silence, I realized I had no idea what I was actually observing. This wasn't grief. Wasn't shock. Wasn't any of the clinical categories I'd been trained to identify and document. This was something else entirely. This was the moment when hope stops being hope and becomes memory. This was the exact second when a mother stops being someone whose child is missing and becomes someone whose child is dead. I should have written it down. I should have documented the precise moment of transformation. Instead, I put my pen away and watched Sarah Martinez learn how to breathe in a world that had just become unrecognizable. The ceremony continued around us. More speeches. More respectful applause. More formal acknowledgement of loss and sacrifice and the importance of remembering. But Sarah had stopped hearing any of it. She was staring at her daughter's name, and I could see her lips moving. Not speaking. Not praying. Just moving, like she was testing different ways to say Maria Elena Martinez now that it was carved in stone instead of written on missing person flyers. Janet was still crying. Still holding her hand. Still being the kind of friend who shows up to memorial services even when she knows it's going to destroy you. And Sarah was learning how to exist in the silence after the joke stops being funny. Learning how to stand when standing means accepting the unacceptable. Learning how to breathe when every breath feels like betrayal because your daughter isn't breathing anymore and will never breathe again. I put away my notepad entirely. Some things can't be documented. Some things can only be witnessed. This was my first lesson in the difference. The human brain, I learned that day, has a fascinating defense mechanism against reality. It simply refuses to accept what it cannot process. Sarah stood in front of her daughter's name for 47 minutes after the ceremony ended. I timed it. Part professional habit, part morbid fascination, part the creeping realization that I was witnessing something my training had never prepared me for. The crowd dispersed. Mayor Richardson shook hands and made appropriate sympathetic noises. Captain Lewis approached Sarah twice, started to speak, then seemed to think better of it and walked away. Even Janet, after whispering something I couldn't hear, had stepped back to give her friend space to process. But Sarah wasn't processing. She was just standing. Yellow dress bright against black granite. Fingertips pressed against the carved letters. Not tracing them, pressing against them, like she was checking to make sure they were real. Like she suspected this might be some elaborate, cruel joke that would dissolve under pressure. I should have left. My documentation was complete. The ceremony was over. Sarah Martinez's reaction would make an interesting footnote in my report about how family members respond to public confirmation of loss. Instead, I found myself sitting on a bench 20 feet away, pretending to review my notes while actually watching a woman try to make her daughter's death real. "Ma'am?" A young man in a Parks Department uniform approached Sarah hesitantly. "Ma'am, we need to start cleaning up." Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him, like she was seeing another human being for the first time in hours. "Oh," she said. "Of course." Her voice sounded normal. Conversational. Like someone apologizing for taking too long at a checkout counter. But she didn't move. The parks worker shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, you can stay as long as you need. I just wanted to let you know we'll be working around you." "That's very kind," Sarah said. Still pressed against the stone. "Very considerate." The young man nodded and started folding chairs with unnecessary care, like making noise might somehow make things worse. Sarah watched him work for a moment, then looked back at the memorial wall. "Maria Elena Martinez," she said aloud. Not to anyone in particular. Not to the parks worker, who pretended not to hear. Not to Janet, who was standing by the parking area making very important phone calls. Not to me, though I was the only one close enough to witness her first attempt at making her daughter's death into words. "That's her name," she said, still in that normal conversational tone. "That's my daughter's name." She turned to look at me directly. I should have pretended to be absorbed in my notes. Should have maintained the professional distance that keeps documentation clean and objective. Instead, I met her eyes and nodded. "She was 29, Sarah continued, like I'd asked for details. 29 years old. Young for an EMT, but she'd wanted to do it since high school. Said she liked helping people when they were having the worst day of their lives." I found myself closing my notebook entirely. "She was funny," Sarah said. "Terrible at keeping plants alive, but funny. She could make anyone laugh. Even in the emergency room, even when things were bad, she'd find something to joke about. Not inappropriate jokes," she added quickly, like this was an important distinction. "Just the kind that remind you the world isn't entirely awful." The parks worker finished folding chairs and moved to cleaning up program booklets that people had left on the ground. He moved in a wide circle around Sarah, giving her plenty of space. "The last time I talked to her," Sarah said, "she called me at midnight, laughing so hard she could barely speak. She'd helped deliver a baby in the back of a pizza delivery car, and the parents were so grateful they named the baby after her. Maria Elena Pizza Giuseppe Kowalski." She laughed. One short sound. Then, she stopped abruptly, like remembering that laughing wasn't allowed anymore. "That was 3 days before the fire," she said. 3 days before she ran into a burning building to help people she'd never met. Her fingers pressed harder against the carved letters. "I keep thinking," she said, "that if I touch her name enough, maybe she'll feel it. Maybe wherever she is, she'll know I found her." This was not standard grief behavior. In my 3 years of documenting human responses to loss, I'd never encountered someone having a perfectly rational conversation with a memorial wall while exhibiting zero external signs of emotional distress. Except for the pressing. The constant, gentle pressure of fingertips against stone, like she was trying to push through to somewhere else entirely. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. I realized she was talking to me again. "Of course," I said, though my training strongly discouraged personal interaction during observation periods. "Do you think she knew?" "Knew what?" "That she was going to die." Sarah's voice remained perfectly level. when she ran into that building. Do you think she knew she wasn't coming out? The question hung in the air like something physical. Heavy. Requiring an answer that mattered. I don't know, I said honestly. But, I think she knew the risk was worth it. Sarah considered this. Because helping people was worth the risk. That's what Captain Lewis said. Captain Lewis didn't know her. No bitterness in her voice. Just fact. He's a good man, but he didn't know that Maria used to practice emergency scenarios with her stuffed animals when she was 8. That she kept a first aid kit in her purse even when she was off duty. That she cried every time she watched medical shows because she got too emotionally invested in fictional patients. She was building a picture. Not grieving, building. Like she was constructing a complete version of her daughter to replace the memorial version that only mentioned her age and how she died. She was afraid of butterflies, Sarah added. Absolutely terrified. But she'd run into a burning building without hesitation. Humans are complicated like that. I found myself agreeing, though my reports typically avoided philosophical observations about human complexity. She would have made jokes, Sarah said suddenly. While she was helping people evacuate. While she was carrying them to safety. She would have found something ridiculous about the situation and made everyone laugh, even while they were scared. That's beautiful, I said. Wrong word. Clinical observer doesn't call things beautiful. But, Sarah smiled. First real smile since her daughter's name was read aloud. You think so? I think she sounds like someone who understood what mattered. She did. The smile faded, but gently. Like sunset instead of sudden darkness. She absolutely did. Janet appeared at Sarah's elbow. Honey, she said carefully, I called your sister. She's driving down. She'll be here tonight. That's nice, Sarah said. Rosa will want to see the memorial. She will. But, maybe we should go home now? You've been standing here for a long time. Sarah looked surprised. Have I? About an hour. Oh. Sarah glanced around, noticing for the first time that the park was nearly empty. I didn't realize. But, she still didn't move away from the wall. 5 more minutes, she asked Janet. Take as long as you need. Janet shot me a look, grateful, I think, that Sarah had been talking to someone instead of standing in complete silence. Then, she walked back to the parking area to wait. I brought flowers, Sarah said to me. Every week for 8 months. I brought flowers to every memorial service, every dedication ceremony. I told myself I was honoring all the fallen. Being a good community member. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small bouquet of yellow daisies. But really I was practicing, she said. Practicing for this. For the day I'd finally know where to put them. She placed the flowers at the base of the memorial wall, directly below her daughter's name. There, she said. Now she has flowers. Then, she stepped back and looked at the memorial like she was seeing it for the first time. It's smaller than I expected, she said. In my head, I kept imagining something massive. Cathedral-sized. Because losing her felt so enormous, I thought her memorial should be enormous too. She was right. The wall was elegant but modest. 14 names on black granite. Nothing massive about it except the weight of what it represented. But, this is better, she decided. This is more like her. Simple. Practical. Not trying to be more important than it needs to be. She turned to me again. Do you document this sort of thing often? I hesitated. My cover story was that I was a journalist covering the ceremony, but Sarah seemed too intelligent to buy obvious lies. I study how people respond to loss, I said. How they cope. How they survive. And, what have you learned? Another question that required honesty. That every person does it differently, I said. That there's no right way to grieve. That humans are remarkably resilient and remarkably fragile at the same time. That sounds about right. Sarah looked back at the memorial. I thought it would feel different. Seeing her name. I thought it would make it more real. Doesn't it? No, she said simply. It makes it more permanent. Those are different things. I wrote that down. Not for my report, for myself. The distinction between real and permanent. Something I'd never considered before. The fire was 8 months ago, Sarah said. I've known she was probably dead for 8 months. But probably and definitely are different things too. How does definitely feel? She considered the question seriously. Heavier, she said finally. Not more painful, just heavier. Like I've been carrying a possibility all this time, and now I'm carrying a fact. Facts weigh more than possibilities. She touched the stone one more time. Gentle. Like saying goodbye. Thank you, she said to me. For what? For letting me talk about her. For asking the right questions. For not trying to tell me how I should be feeling. She picked up her purse and smoothed her yellow dress. I should go home now, she said. Janet's been very patient, and my sister will want to hear about this. But, she paused before walking away. Can I tell you something strange? Of course. Standing here, talking to you about Maria, it's the most normal I've felt in 8 months. Not better, not worse. Just normal. Like myself again. She smiled, and this time the smile stayed. I think that's what I was looking for, she said. Not closure, not peace. Just the feeling of being myself in a world where my daughter is dead. Of being Sarah Martinez, Maria's mother, instead of Sarah Martinez, victim of tragedy. What's the difference? Maria's mother tells stories about her daughter, she said. Victim of tragedy just stands in silence. She walked toward Janet, who was waiting by the car. Halfway across the park, she turned back and called to me. Her full name was Maria Elena Martinez Kowalski, she said loudly enough for anyone still in the park to hear. She hyphenated when she married Danny, but she kept Martinez because she said it connected her to all the strong women in our family. Then, she got in Janet's car and drove away. I sat on the bench for another hour, pretending to review my notes but actually thinking about the weight of facts versus possibilities. About the difference between real and permanent. About how humans survive not just loss, but the transition from grieving someone who might be dead to grieving someone who definitely is. When I finally wrote my report that evening, I left most of it out. How do you document the moment when grief transforms into memory? How do you capture the sound of someone's voice changing when they say their daughter's name carved in stone instead of painted on a missing poster? How do you measure the weight of definitely? You don't. You can't. Some things can only be witnessed. Some things can only be honored by remembering them exactly as they happened, without trying to categorize or explain or make them fit into neat behavioral categories. That night I started keeping 2 sets of notes. The official ones, for my reports. And the real ones, for my understanding. In the real ones, I wrote, today I watched Sarah Martinez learn that her daughter was officially, permanently, definitely dead. She handled it by talking about butterflies and pizza babies and the weight of facts. She wore a yellow dress because it was Maria's favorite color. She brought flowers because Maria deserved flowers. She talked to a stranger because talking about Maria made her feel like Maria's mother instead of tragedy's victim. She taught me that humans don't just survive loss. They survive the moment when loss stops being something that might be true and becomes something that will always be true. And they do it by choosing, moment by moment, to be who they are in relationship to what they've lost. Sarah Martinez chose to be Maria's mother. Maria Elena Martinez Kowalski. Age 29. EMT. Afraid of butterflies. Made jokes in emergencies. Kept first aid kits in her purse. Cried at medical shows. Died helping strangers. Her mother wears yellow and brings flowers and tells stories. Her mother chooses to be her mother instead of tragedy's victim. Every day. Permanently. That's how humans survive the weight of definitely. I never put that in an official report. But I never forgot it either. Some documentation is just for the observer. Some truths are just for keeping. 3 weeks later, I found myself violating every protocol I'd ever been taught about maintaining observational distance. I was sitting in my car outside Sarah Martinez's house at 6:47 a.m., drinking convenience store coffee and pretending I had any legitimate reason to be there. I didn't. What I had was an uncomfortable certainty that my documentation was incomplete. That watching someone receive the worst news of their life in a public ceremony was only the first chapter of a story I needed to understand. What I didn't have was any official justification for follow-up observation, any approved methodology for extended subject tracking, or any reasonable explanation for why I'd been thinking about Sarah Martinez every day since the memorial dedication. The truth was simpler and, more problematic, I'd become emotionally invested in my subject matter. Clinical observation error number 1. But there I was. At 6:52 a.m., the front door opened. Sarah emerged in running shoes and the same yellow dress, carrying a small bouquet of mixed flowers and a thermos of what I assumed was coffee. She walked to a blue Honda Civic in the driveway, placed the flowers carefully on the passenger seat, and drove away. I followed her. Clinical observation error number 2. She drove directly to Harbor District Memorial Park. Parked in the same spot she'd used 3 weeks ago. Walked to the memorial wall with the same measured pace I'd observed before. But something was different. Her movements were purposeful now. Routine. Like someone who'd done this exact same thing multiple times and had developed an efficient system. She placed the flowers at the base of the wall below Maria's name. Then, she opened her thermos, poured coffee into the cup that served as a lid, and sat down on the ground facing the memorial. Cross-legged. Comfortable. Like she was planning to stay a while. From my observation point 30 yards away, I watched her start talking. Not to herself. To the wall. To Maria's name. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her mouth moving, could see the gestures that accompanied whatever story she was telling. Animated. Expressive. The body language of someone having a real conversation with someone who was really there. This was not behavior I'd anticipated. After 20 minutes, she stood up, touched Maria's name once, and drove away. The next morning, I was back. Same routine. Same time. Same yellow dress, fresh flowers, thermos of coffee, cross-legged conversation with a granite wall. The morning after that, identical pattern. By the end of the week, I had to acknowledge that Sarah Martinez had developed a ritual. More than a ritual. A relationship. She was visiting her daughter's memorial the way some people visit coffee shops. Regular. Expected. Part of the daily structure that makes life manageable. Which posed an interesting observational question: was this healthy grieving behavior or concerning fixation? My training suggested the latter. Healthy grief involves gradual acceptance and movement toward normal functioning. Daily visits to memorial sites typically indicated difficulty processing loss, potential complications in the grieving process. But Sarah didn't look like someone struggling to function. She looked like someone who'd found a way to include her dead daughter in her daily routine. On Friday morning, I made a decision that violated every remaining protocol about observer neutrality. When Sarah sat down with her coffee to start her daily conversation, I got out of my car and walked over. "Good morning," I said. She looked up without surprise. Like she'd been expecting me. "You've been following me," she said. Not accusatory. Observational. "I have. I apologize." "Don't apologize. I'm not upset about it." She gestured to the ground beside her. "Would you like to sit?" "I was just telling Maria about the absolutely ridiculous thing that happened at the grocery store yesterday." I sat down. Janet was right about the automatic doors, Sarah continued, like we'd been having this conversation for weeks. They're completely unreliable. But, yesterday, the door got confused by someone's reflective jacket and kept opening and closing every 2 seconds. Like it was having a mechanical panic attack. She paused, looking at Maria's name. She would have found that hilarious, Sarah said. Maria loved it when technology malfunctioned in ridiculous ways. She said it reminded her that humans are still smarter than machines, just not as reliable. Is that what you do? I asked. Tell her stories? I tell her about my day. What I'm thinking about. Funny things that happen. Problems I'm trying to solve. Sarah sipped her coffee. Same things I used to tell her when she was alive, except now I have to do all the talking. Does it help? It helps me remember how to be her mother, Sarah said. When she was alive, being Maria's mother meant sharing experiences with her. Asking for advice. Complaining about annoying people. Making each other laugh. I don't want to stop being her mother just because she's dead. She pulled a small notebook from her purse. I started keeping track, she said, showing me pages of handwritten entries. Things I want to tell her. Things she would have opinions about. Problems she would have helped me solve. The notebook was filled with what looked like conversation topics. Rosa's new boyfriend seems nice but drives too fast. The neighbor's dog learned to open their gate. Maria would have loved training videos. Weird customer at work reminded me of that guy Maria dated in college, the one who collected vintage lunchboxes. City council meeting about traffic lights. Maria would have had opinions. This is remarkable, I said, meaning it. Is it strange? Sarah asked. I know it's probably not normal. But, normal doesn't really apply anymore, does it? I don't think there is normal when it comes to grief. Good, because I have no idea what I'm doing. She laughed. I'm making this up as I go along. How long have you been coming here? Every morning since the dedication. Well, every morning except Sunday. I figured even dead daughters deserve one day off from their mother's daily updates. What made you start? Sarah considered the question. The day after the dedication, I woke up and realized I had nowhere to put all the things I wanted to tell her. For 8 months, I could imagine telling her when she came home. When they found her. When this nightmare ended. But, after seeing her name on the wall, I knew she wasn't coming home. So I needed somewhere to put all the Maria-shaped conversations I still wanted to have. She gestured at the memorial. This seemed like the obvious place. Do you think she can hear you? Honestly? I don't know. I don't really care. The point isn't whether she can hear me. The point is that I can still talk to her. That being her mother doesn't end just because her life ended. I found myself writing this down. Not for any report, for my own understanding. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. Of course. Why are you really here? Following me, I mean. You said you study how people cope with loss, but this feels more personal than professional. Direct question. Required an honest answer. Because I realized I don't understand grief, I said. I can document it, categorize it, measure it. But I don't understand it. And watching you at the dedication ceremony made me realize how much I've been missing. What have you been missing? The fact that grief isn't just an emotional response to loss. It's a relationship with loss. It's an ongoing interaction between who you are and who you were with the person who's gone. Sarah smiled. That's very philosophical. Your daughter turned me into a philosopher. She was good at that. Maria had a way of making people think differently about everything. Sarah looked at the memorial. She would have liked that you're trying to understand instead of just document. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Sarah finished her coffee. I tried to figure out how to categorize what I was observing. Can I tell you what I think you're missing? Sarah said eventually. Please. You're trying to understand grief as something that happens to people. But grief isn't something that happens to you. Grief is something you do. It's active. It's a choice you make every day about how to carry love for someone who's not there anymore. She pointed to her notebook. This isn't me being unable to let go. This is me choosing how to hold on. There's a difference. What's the difference? Being unable to let go would be expecting her to answer when I talk to her. Expecting her to come home. Expecting things to go back to how they were. Sarah packed her thermos back into her bag. Choosing how to hold on means accepting that she's dead and deciding that being her mother is still part of who I am. Even though she's gone. Especially because she's gone. Anyone can be someone's mother when that someone is alive and present and available for mothering. It takes intention to stay someone's mother when they're dead. She stood up, brushed grass off her dress. Maria used to say that love doesn't disappear when someone dies, it just has to find new ways to express itself. So that's what I'm doing. I'm finding new ways to express being her mother. And this works? Define works. Sarah laughed. Does it bring her back? No. Does it make me feel less sad? Not particularly. Does it make me feel like myself in a world without my daughter? Yes. Most days. She touched Maria's name one more time. Tomorrow is Saturday, she said to me. I come earlier on Saturdays. 6 a.m. In case you want to continue your research. Then, she walked back to her car and drove away. I sat by the memorial for another hour, trying to process what I'd learned. Sarah Martinez wasn't stuck in grief. She was actively constructing a relationship with grief. She was building new rituals, new routines, new ways of being Maria's mother in a world where Maria was dead. This wasn't pathology. This was adaptation. Human adaptation. The kind I was supposed to be documenting but had never really understood until I watched someone do it in real time. That evening, I called my supervisor. I need to request extended observational time on the Martinez case, I said. The memorial dedication? That documentation was completed weeks ago. The memorial dedication was just the beginning, I said. I need to understand how humans adapt to permanent loss. How they restructure their identities around absence. How they maintain relationship with people who are gone. That's outside the scope of our behavioral analysis protocol. Then, I need to expand the protocol. Long pause. This is highly irregular. Sir, with respect, humans are highly irregular. Our protocols assume that grief is a problem to be solved, a condition to be resolved. But, what if grief is actually a solution? What if it's how humans maintain connection across the boundary between life and death? You're talking about emotional attachment to research subjects. That's a significant concern. I'm talking about discovering that our understanding of human resilience is incomplete. Sarah Martinez isn't broken. She's adapting. She's creating new ways to be who she is in circumstances we never taught her how to handle. That's not pathology. That's innovation. Another long pause. 6 weeks, my supervisor said finally. Extended observation for 6 weeks. Then, you submit a comprehensive analysis of adaptive grief behaviors and we evaluate whether this represents valuable research or observer compromise. Thank you. And, Martinez? Yes, sir? Maintain professional distance. Don't let your subject matter change you more than you're changing our understanding of your subject matter. Too late for that, I thought. But, I said, understood, sir. The next morning, I was back at Harbor District Memorial Park at 5:55 a.m. At 6 a.m. exactly, Sarah Martinez arrived with fresh flowers and her thermos of coffee. This time, when she sat down to talk to her daughter's name, she looked directly at me and said, Maria, I'd like you to meet my friend who's learning how to understand grief instead of just measuring it. Then, she started telling Maria about a documentary she'd watched about people who train service dogs, and how Maria would have loved the part where a golden retriever learned to open doors but kept opening the wrong ones. I took notes. Not for documentation. For understanding. For the first time in my career, I was learning something that couldn't be measured. I was learning how humans love people who are dead. And how that love becomes a form of survival. 6 weeks became 8 months. 8 months of watching Sarah Martinez teach me everything my training had failed to mention about human resilience. Not the dramatic, inspirational kind. The ordinary kind. The kind that shows up every morning at 6:47 a.m. with fresh flowers and yesterday's stories, ready to practice being someone's mother in a world where that someone is dead. By December, I wasn't documenting Sarah's grief anymore. I was documenting her expertise. Because that's what it had become. Expertise. Sarah Martinez had become an expert in loving a dead daughter, in maintaining relationship across the boundary between life and death, in being herself in circumstances that would have destroyed the person she used to be. The yellow dress had given way to practical winter coats, but she still wore yellow scarves, yellow earrings, small daily choices that said Maria mattered enough to remember in color. The conversations had evolved too. What started as daily updates had become something more complex. Sarah still told Maria about her day, but now she also asked for advice. Out loud. Then, sat quietly, like listening for answers. I don't hear her voice, she explained to me one particularly cold morning. But I know what she would say. 29 years of being her mother means I have her voice internalized. So when I ask her what she thinks about something, I already know what she'd think. I just need the space and quiet to remember. That's remarkable. That's motherhood. We carry our children's voices inside us whether they're alive or dead. The difference is just whether we have external confirmation that we're getting their opinions right. Sarah had begun bringing 2 coffee cups. One for herself, one for me. She'd never asked if I wanted coffee during these morning conversations. She just started bringing it, like my presence had become expected rather than tolerated. Maria would have liked you, she told me on a Tuesday morning in late January, almost a year after the memorial dedication. How do you know? Because you ask the right questions. Maria always said the best people are the ones who ask questions that make you think differently about things you thought you already understood. What would she think about this? I gestured to the 2 of us, sitting cross-legged in front of her memorial, sharing coffee and conversation at dawn. Sarah laughed. She'd think it's hilarious that her memorial has become a coffee shop. She'd probably wonder why we don't bring pastries. The next morning, Sarah brought croissants. From Maria, she said, handing me one. She says we're both too thin and need to eat more carbohydrates. This had become our routine. Our ritual. Our practice of making space for relationship with someone who wasn't there but somehow still was. It should have concerned me. Professional observers aren't supposed to become participants in their subjects' coping mechanisms. Instead, it had become the most valuable part of my education. Because Sarah wasn't just coping with loss. She was transforming loss into something else entirely. Into connection. Into ongoing relationship. Into a form of love that death couldn't interrupt. Can I ask you something? I said one morning in February. Always. Do you think this is healthy? Sarah considered the question seriously. Define healthy. Functional. Adaptive. Moving towards some kind of resolution or peace. Ah. Sarah sipped her coffee. You're still thinking about grief as something that should end. Shouldn't it? Should love end when someone dies? That's different. Is it? Sarah looked at Maria's name. If love doesn't end when someone dies, why should grief end? Grief is just love with nowhere to go. So you find somewhere for it to go. She pulled out her notebook, now in its 3rd volume. I've been keeping track, she said. Not just things I want to tell her, but things I've learned from her. Since she died. What do you mean? She's still teaching me things. Still helping me solve problems. Still making me think differently about the world. Sarah opened the notebook to a page filled with small handwritten observations. See this? Maria would say that grief is not the opposite of happiness, it's the price of having loved someone worth missing. That's something I learned by imagining what she'd tell me about feeling guilty for laughing at funny movies. You feel guilty for laughing? I used to. Like being happy was betraying her memory. But, then, I thought about what Maria would say about that, and I realized she'd be furious if I stopped laughing. She'd say happiness isn't disrespectful to the dead, unhappiness is just wasteful of the living. Sarah turned the page. Or this one, the goal isn't to stop missing someone you love. The goal is to miss them in ways that don't destroy you. That came from Maria when I was trying to decide whether to clean out her apartment or keep paying rent on it forever. What did you decide? I cleaned it out. But, I kept her favorite coffee mug and her first aid kit and the ridiculous collection of rubber ducks she kept on her bathroom counter. Sarah smiled. I kept the things that make me happy to remember instead of the things that make me sad to remember. That seems wise. That's Maria. She was always wise about distinguishing between helpful and unhelpful emotions. She used to say that feeling sad because you miss someone is useful sadness. Feeling sad because you think missing someone means you're broken is useless sadness. Sarah closed the notebook. So to answer your question about whether this is healthy, I don't know if sitting in a park every morning talking to a dead person is textbook mental health. But, it's helping me learn how to miss my daughter in ways that don't destroy me. It's helping me stay connected to who she was instead of just obsessing over how she died. It's helping me be the kind of person she'd be proud to have raised. And, that's enough? That's everything. We sat in comfortable silence. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the memorial park. Other early morning visitors had started to appear: joggers, dog walkers, other people beginning their daily routines. I have something to tell you, I said. Oh? My supervisor wants me to finish this observation study. Write up my findings. Move on to new research. Sarah nodded. Of course. You can't sit in a park drinking coffee with a grieving mother forever. What if I want to? She looked surprised. Want to what? Keep coming here. Keep learning from you. Not as a research subject, just as. I struggled for the right words. As someone who has something to teach me about being human. You realize I'm not teaching you about being human. I'm teaching you about being human in the worst circumstances. There's a difference. Maybe that's what I need to learn. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. You know what Maria would say about this? What? She'd say that the best relationships are the ones that start accidentally and become intentional. She'd say that if someone wants to keep learning from you, that means you have something worth teaching. Sarah smiled. She'd also say that you'd better keep bringing good coffee, because life is too short for bad coffee, even when you're drinking it in a memorial park at dawn. Is that a yes? That's a yes. But, with conditions. What conditions? First condition, you stop thinking of this as research. If you're going to be here, you're here as my friend, not as my observer. I don't want to be someone's case study anymore. Agreed. What's the second condition? You have to start talking to Maria yourself. Not about me, about you. About whatever you want her to know. I'm tired of being the only one having conversations with her. She had lots of friends when she was alive. She should have friends now too. The suggestion caught me off guard. I don't know how to talk to dead people. Neither did I. You figure it out as you go. Sarah stood up, brushed grass off her coat. Think about it. If she was alive and you were meeting her for the first time, what would you want her to know about you? She packed up her coffee cup and thermos. Tomorrow's Saturday, she said. I come earlier on Saturdays. 6 a.m. In case you decide you want to introduce yourself to my daughter. Then, she walked to her car and drove away. I sat by the memorial for another hour, staring at Maria Elena Martinez's name and trying to figure out how to talk to someone who wasn't there. Finally, I said, "Hi, Maria. My name is David. I'm a friend of your mother's." "Well, I'm becoming a friend of your mother's." I started out studying her, which sounds terrible when I say it out loud, but she's taught me more about being human than anyone else I've ever met. I felt ridiculous. But I kept talking. "I wanted you to know that your mother is remarkable. She's created this whole way of staying connected to you that's somehow both heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. She talks about you like you're still here, but not in a way that seems like she doesn't understand that you're dead. More like she understands that love doesn't die just because people do." The morning joggers ran past. A woman walking her dog smiled at me as she passed. Normal people doing normal things while I sat on the ground having a conversation with carved letters. "I don't know if you can hear this," I said to Maria's name. "But, if you can, I want you to know that your mother is still your mother. Every day. She still brings you flowers and tells you stories and asks for your advice. She still wears yellow because it was your favorite color. She still makes jokes because you would have made jokes." A wind picked up, moving the flowers Sarah had left. "And she's teaching people like me that grief isn't something that happens to you, it's something you do. It's how you choose to love someone who's dead. It's how you decide to stay connected across impossible distance." I looked at my notebook, filled with months of observations about human adaptation to loss. I'm supposed to write a report about her. About how humans cope with grief. But I don't think I can reduce what she's taught me to academic language. How do you measure the weight of love that has nowhere to go? How do you categorize the choice to remain someone's mother even when that someone is gone? The question hung in the air. "Maybe you could tell me," I said to Maria's name. "Tomorrow. When I come back." The next morning, I was there at 5:55 a.m. At 6 a.m. exactly, Sarah arrived with flowers and coffee for 3. "Extra cup for Maria," she explained, placing it at the base of the memorial. She always liked coffee. Seemed rude to leave her out. We sat down in our usual spot. "Did you introduce yourself?" Sarah asked. "I did." "How did it go?" I considered the question. "I have no idea." "How do you tell if a dead person likes you?" Sarah laughed. "Same way you tell if a living person likes you. You pay attention to how you feel when you're around them. Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel like yourself? Do you feel like they understand what you're trying to say? And how do I feel around Maria? You tell me." I thought about it. About sitting by her memorial, talking to her name, sharing stories with her mother. "I feel like she's listening," I said finally. "I feel like she would have been someone I'd want to know." "Then, she likes you." Sarah handed me my coffee. Maria always liked people who paid attention. People who asked good questions. People who weren't afraid of complicated emotions. Good thing, since I'm full of complicated emotions about all this. Such as the fact that I came here to study grief and ended up learning about love. That I started out documenting human coping mechanisms and ended up becoming part of someone's coping mechanism. That I was supposed to remain objective and instead became invested. Sarah considered this. Maria would say that's called growth. That's called discovering that understanding humans requires being human, not just observing humanity from a distance. And what do you say? I say welcome to the club of people who have been changed by knowing Maria Elena Martinez. Sarah raised her coffee cup. It's a good club to be in. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over Harbor District Memorial Park. After a while, I said, "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" "Why this works. Why this helps. It's not about maintaining connection with Maria despite the fact that she's dead. It's about maintaining connection with who you are because of having known Maria. Sarah smiled. Very good. What else? Grief isn't the opposite of healing. Grief is a form of healing. It's how love adapts to loss. It's how relationships survive death. And humans don't get over loss. They get through loss. They learn to carry it differently. They find ways to let love for dead people become part of their ongoing life instead of something that stops their life. Excellent. Sarah finished her coffee. You're ready to graduate. Graduate from what? From thinking about grief as pathology and starting to think about grief as expertise. From observing human resilience to understanding human resilience. Sarah packed up her thermos. From being my researcher to being my friend. She stood up, touched Maria's name once. See you tomorrow, sweetheart, she said to the memorial. Then, to me, see you tomorrow, David. Same time, same place? Same time, same place. Maria will expect her coffee. I stayed by the memorial for a few more minutes after Sarah left. Thank you, I said to Maria's name. For sharing your mother with me. For teaching me that love doesn't end when life ends. For showing me that grief is just love with nowhere to go, looking for somewhere to be useful. The wind picked up again, moving the flowers. See you tomorrow, I said. And I meant it. Not as a researcher. Not as an observer. As someone who had learned that the most important human relationships aren't always with living people. Sometimes they're with the memory of someone who was loved well enough that losing them becomes a practice of continuing to love them. Sometimes they're with the connections formed in the space between loss and understanding, between observation and participation, between studying humanity and becoming more human. 3 months later, when I finally submitted my report on adaptive grief behaviors, I titled it What Remains: How Humans Transform Loss into Ongoing Relationship. The conclusions were simple: humans don't overcome grief. They master it. They learn to love people who are dead. They create rituals that honor loss while allowing life to continue. They discover that the goal isn't to stop missing someone. The goal is to miss them in ways that connect rather than destroy. They practice being who they are in relationship to who they've lost. And, sometimes, if they're very fortunate, they find that grief shared becomes understanding, that love witnessed becomes connection, that the space between observer and participant becomes friendship. What I didn't include in the report, that I still meet Sarah Martinez every morning at Harbor District Memorial Park. That we still bring coffee for Maria. That Sarah still wears yellow and tells stories and asks for advice from someone who can't answer but somehow still does. That I've learned to talk to Maria myself, to include her in conversations, to ask her opinion about things I'm trying to understand. That sometimes the most important research happens when you stop researching and start participating. That the silence after hearing Maria's name that first day wasn't empty. It was full. Full of love that had nowhere to go except forward. Forward into new ways of being mother and daughter. Forward into friendships formed around shared understanding of love and loss. Forward into the recognition that humans don't just survive impossible circumstances. They transform impossible circumstances into new ways of being human. The joke lasted 10 seconds. The silence after her name lasted longer. But what grew in that silence has lasted longest of all. Love. Adaptation. Connection. The ongoing practice of being human in a world where everyone you love will someday be gone, but where love itself continues, finding new forms, new expressions, new ways to matter. That's what remains. That's what I learned from Sarah Martinez and her daughter Maria Elena Martinez Kowalski, who died helping strangers and lived long enough to teach her mother how to love people who are dead. And who, through her mother, taught me the same thing. How to love people who are dead. How to let that love become part of living. How to find friendship in the space between loss and understanding. How to discover that the most important human connections don't always require both people to be alive. Sometimes they just require both people to be loved. Well enough to remember. Well enough to honor. Well enough to let love continue, finding new forms, new expressions, new ways to connect across any distance. Even the distance between life and death. Even the distance between observer and participant. Even the distance between stranger and friend. Love finds a way. That's what remains. That's what I learned. That's what Maria taught me, through her mother, every morning at 6:47 a.m. in Harbor District Memorial Park. How to love people who are dead. And how to let that love make me more alive.